In Washington, the House of Representatives has passed an $831.5 billion defense appropriations bill, marking a significant step forward in determining U.S. military spending for the coming years. The vote, 221 to 209, followed mostly along party lines, but with a handful of cross-party defections. 3 Republicans, known for their fiscally conservative or maverick positions, Thomas Massie of Kentucky, Marjorie Taylor Greene of Georgia, and Tim Burchett of Tennessee, voted against the measure. On the Democratic side, 5 representatives broke ranks to support the bill, including Don Davis of North Carolina, Jared Golden of Maine, Vicente Gonzalez of Texas, Adam Gray of California, and Marie Gluesenkamp Perez of Washington. The bill, officially titled the Department of Defense Appropriations Act for 2026, will fund a range of military projects through the end of September 2026, with some allocations stretching into fiscal years 2027, 2028, and even 2030. Among the priorities covered are new naval vessels, next-generation aircraft, and advances in space-based defense systems. One of the most high-profile elements is funding for President Donald Trump's Golden Dome missile defense program. The passage of such a large defense budget reflects the ongoing debates in Congress about military readiness, national defense priorities, and fiscal responsibility, especially as international tensions remain high. The bill's future in the Senate is still uncertain, and as negotiations move forward, amendments or further party defections could influence the final outcome. Meanwhile, in a landmark legal ruling, a federal judge has reinstated Rebecca Kelly Slaughter to the Federal Trade Commission after finding that her removal by President Trump was unlawful. The judge cited a Supreme Court decision from 1935, known as Humphrey's Executor, which established that the president can only remove FTC commissioners for reasons such as inefficiency, neglect of duty, or malfeasance in office. Earlier this year, President Trump dismissed Slaughter, citing differences in policy priorities, a justification that the court concluded failed to meet the legal threshold for removal. Lawmakers have historically placed strict limits on executive power over independent regulatory agencies, and this ruling upholds those boundaries. Judge Lauren L. Ali-Khan stated in her decision that the protections outlined by the Supreme Court clearly apply in this case, making the answer patently obvious. Slaughter's reinstatement may have implications for future moves by presidents to reshape regulatory bodies, as the courts appear poised to maintain a check on executive authority in independent agencies. The ruling also underscores the importance of legal precedent and the balance of power between the executive branch and independent government commissions. In a development with major implications for U.S. information security, the Pentagon has launched an investigation into Microsoft's use of Chinese engineers on sensitive defense cloud systems. The move comes after an investigative report raised serious concerns that foreign personnel, particularly those working from China, may have been permitted to access or be in a position to compromise classified military data. Senator Tom Cotton of Arkansas wrote to Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth, requesting detailed information about all Department of Defense contractors employing foreign workers, especially those from China, and about the safeguards in place for systems maintenance. At the center of the controversy is Microsoft's digital escort framework, implemented to comply with federal contracting rules. This system allows technical support by foreign subject matter experts who are supervised by U.S.-born personnel with security clearances. However, whistleblowers claim these supervisors have little technical expertise and often cannot adequately evaluate the work of the highly skilled engineers they oversee. There are long-standing federal requirements that only U.S. citizens or permanent residents should handle sensitive material, and experts warn that China's sweeping data collection laws could compel Chinese nationals, even those working abroad or remotely, to cooperate with Beijing's intelligence agencies. Security advocates such as Michael Lucci have called the revelations a national embarrassment and demand criminal accountability if any violations or espionage risks are found. Microsoft has defended its model, asserting all personnel undergo approved background checks and that foreign support staff lack direct access to sensitive data. The Defense Information Systems Agency, initially unaware of specific details, later clarified that so-called digital escorts operate only in carefully selected, unclassified environments. As the Pentagon responds to congressional inquiries and the investigation proceeds, concerns about the supply chain's vulnerability and broader issues of cybersecurity and defense contracting are expected to gain renewed legislative scrutiny. Elsewhere on Capitol Hill, Congress has approved a sweeping $9 billion rescissions package that includes a $1.1 billion cut in funding for the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, the primary national source of operational support for NPR and PBS. The measure, requested by the Trump administration, has reignited debate over the role and bias of publicly funded media. While some lawmakers and conservative commentators argue that federal support for NPR and PBS is no longer justified, alleging liberal bias in reporting, others emphasize the profound impact the cuts may have on smaller, rural broadcasters. According to journalism experts, urban stations tend to be less reliant on federal funding, while affiliates in less populated regions depend heavily on such support for daily operations, local news gathering, and disaster alerts. Judy Mueller, emerita journalism professor at USC and former PBS reporter, has warned that the loss could be most acutely felt by rural listeners and viewers who lack access to other reliable sources of news, particularly during emergencies. At stake, experts argue, is not just the fate of the national brands of NPR and PBS, but the survival of local media ecosystems and the broader public's access to trusted, locally tailored information. As the funding reductions take effect, stations across the country may be forced to cut back on programming or seek alternative sources of support, underscoring broader shifts in how Americans receive news amidst a changing media landscape. And in another major policy proposal, the Department of Justice has announced a plan to partially restore Second Amendment rights to some people previously convicted of crimes. The draft rule, filed for public comment, would allow individuals convicted of certain nonviolent felonies to regain their rights to own and possess firearms, provided the Attorney General concludes they do not pose a risk to public safety. Under current federal law, all convicted felons are barred from owning firearms, regardless of whether their offenses were violent. However, an exception in the law lets the Attorney General restore gun rights to those deemed unlikely to engage in dangerous behavior. This new proposal aims to clarify and expand the use of this exception, arguing it could benefit people convicted of less serious, nonviolent crimes who have demonstrated lawful behavior since their convictions. Not surprisingly, the proposal has sparked pushback from gun control advocacy groups, who argue that such rules could inadvertently allow violent offenders or those convicted of domestic abuse to obtain firearms again, if not carefully vetted. Supporters of the measure see it as a means of providing relief for individuals who have served their time and shown evidence of rehabilitation. The debate over Second Amendment rights for former felons is likely to heat up as the proposal enters the public comment phase, with both sides pressing their cases in Congress and the courts.